and welcome back to yet another episode of On the Grid Podcast, Season 4, Episode 17. This is our Imola review and our Monaco preview, a bit of a bumper episode for you guys up ahead as we look over qualifying, we look over the race, we touch upon the Formula 2 and the Formula 3, and then we preview this weekend's Monaco Grand Prix. I'm your host, Adrian, joined once again by my co-host, Ethan Evans. Ethan, how are you today?
Good. I think the last 10 laps of Imola woke me up a little bit, but aside from that, yeah, no, good here.
Yeah, definitely a lot of action, which we can speak about later on the episode. And today we have another guest. We're slowly starting to roll the guests a little bit more frequently. We've got Coops from Everything F1. Coops, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me on.
Let's kick off the episode by looking over Q1. In Q1 at the Imola Grand Prix, the bottom five was Valtteri Bottas, Zhou Guanyu, Kevin Magnussen, a huge surprise of Fernando Alonso and Logan Sargent, who had his lap time deleted and obviously wasn't classified but was able to race and finished in 20th in that qualifying session. Ethan, the biggest shock, arguably, Fernando Alonso, obviously had that crash in FP3, had to have his car fixed very speedily by the Aston Martin crew, but unfortunately, they weren't able to find a lot of the spares from especially the upgrades that they bought to Imola. How surprised were you to see Fernando knocked out in Q1?
Yeah, it is a massive shock. I think it's probably, certainly in recent memory, Fernando Alonso's worst weekend in Formula One in a very long time. I think, like you said, he had that crash in FP3 and then he went over the gravel actually on his first run. And I think that must have caused some floor damage because then on his second lap, he was absolutely nowhere. Couldn't put in a lap time that was anywhere near like challenging to get into Q2. So it's probably a case of floor damage, which is why he then started from the pit lane on Sunday.
Coops, your thoughts on Fernando Alonso? Obviously, as Ethan just pointed, arguably probably one of his worst qualifying performances in quite a long time. But obviously, it's probably an anomaly. This weekend probably one of the worst, but probably just a one-off for Fernando Alonso.
Yeah, it just looks like one of those weekends for him. Just things just didn't click. There's not really any discernible reason. Maybe thing is as Ethan says, maybe a wee bit of minor damage which threw off the setup for the car. And when you go off and have a big incident in FP3, regardless of how good you are, you're always going to be up against it to get that car back into the window. And Aston Martin aren't really firing on all cylinders this season compared to where they were at the start of last season. So, yeah, I think a lot of small things just compounded the weekend for Alonso, which didn't get much better as the weekend went on and went into the race.
Obviously, rounding off Q1, Logan Sargent, Kevin Magnussen, Zhou Guanyu, and Valtteri Bottas. Ethan, any surprises there? Maybe Kevin Magnussen, a little bit of a shock to see him knocked out in Q1 and not challenging much further in Q2. But do you think out of those four drivers, it's not much of a shock seeing them in the bottom five?
No, not massively, to be honest. Maybe K-Man could have got through, but then who would have been in his place? Because I don't think there's anybody really that stands out. Obviously, the Alpines both got through. They haven't had the best of like this season, but seems they've they're starting to get their act together a little bit and got both cars through to Q2 on the back of Esteban Ocon getting their first points last weekend.
Yeah, let's kick off Q2 with a bit of a conversation about the two Alpines. Sergio Perez in 11th. Obviously, we'll talk about him a little later on. That was probably arguably the biggest shock in Q2. Esteban Ocon in 12th, Lance Stroll in 13th, Alex Albon in 14th, and Pierre Gasly in 15th. Coops, Alpine have struggled a lot this season compared to last season. Obviously, in Bahrain, they were running plumb last. They've slowly started to piece things together. They're slowly starting to go up the field. And I think this performance in Q2, I think it's the best of a bad situation, but they're slowly making improvements.
They're certainly making improvements. As you say, they were plumb last. The car was underpowered and overweight at the start of the season, failed its crash testing from the Monaco, so they had to then add weight to pack it up. And then, the Renault engine isn't the best on the grid. But yeah, this is just a continuation from the Miami weekend where I think it was Ocon, if memory serves me right, got their first point. So they are getting better, but for a works team, they shouldn't be where they are. So it kind of just follows the script of a Renault works team underperforming, which they've done for decades, to be honest.
Ethan, I think it's the first time this season that we're having a bit of a Sergio Perez run, and I know you're very good at them. So take it away. P11, only P11.
Yeah, I'm holding back a little bit here. Obviously, the Red Bull should have been in Q3, regardless, but they did have some struggles this weekend. Is there a couple of cracks in the Red Bull's armor? We know Sergio Perez has the tendency to put in a disappointing qualifying performance, but still you'd expect him to get through into Q3 at the bare minimum. And that really set up his weekend for failure. And he can only really blame himself for only getting a small amount of points. But disappointing for Perez and Red Bull. But when you look at where they were in practice, they didn't have the best weekend. I know, obviously, we'll talk about the race later on, but it wasn't the dominant performance of Red Bull that we've seen over the last year and a bit.
It wasn't as dominant as you pointed out, but moving on to Q3, still one man on top, Max Verstappen. Even though he held off the two McLarens, with a top three separated by merely a tenth. Coops and Verstappen was complaining all weekend that the car was struggling to turn, the tyres weren't switched on, etc., etc. But over one lap, that man can certainly hook it up and get himself on pole position no matter what.
It certainly looks that way. There was quite a few cars at the start of the sessions that were struggling. I think, if I remember right, Alonso was off. I'm sure there was a Williams through the gravel in FP1. So it was a shock seeing Verstappen joining them. I don't know if he just felt he needed a different challenge, but they've managed to figure it out. And yeah, that's one of the things about Max. It's going to go back when you look over his time when he does decide to walk away from Formula One, that regardless of what's put in front of him, he tends to always figure a way to win it. And it's usually the kind of extra bit that separates from a good Formula One driver to your Ayrton Sennas, your Verstappens, Hamiltons, those ones that are just in a different bracket. So Max has shown that when the chips are down, he knows when to do it. I think he's going to have to start working a lot harder now to get that sweet spot. I think that's going to narrow a lot more considering the pace of the McLaren's development and arguably maybe Ferrari, who are getting there but not quite there yet.
Ferrari looked like the team to beat throughout all the practice sessions, even. But it was the two McLarens that pipped him to P2 and P3. Oscar Piastri ahead of Lando Norris. Obviously, Oscar Piastri did enjoy a three-place grid drop for blocking Kevin Magnussen in Q1. How impressed were you with Oscar Piastri's pace? Obviously, he had half of the upgrades that Lando Norris did in Miami. And now with the full package, we saw kind of at the forefront that Oscar Piastri is at the level of Lando Norris when the machinery is level.
Yeah, I don't think it's much of a surprise at this point, is it? Oscar Piastri's done a brilliant job. And he wasn't too far off the pace in Miami, despite the fact that he only had half the upgrades. So the fact he was able to out-qualify him after obviously that grid drop it is a good effort for him. I know it's not something he's done too many times in Formula One, but he's always been around about there, Oscar Piastri. So a good effort from him. Unfortunate for him that he got that grid drop, and I think it did affect his race a lot. I think it affected McLaren's chances of winning as well, because if they had two cars up against Verstappen, it would be a whole different picture, I think. They could really utilise both cars and give one of their drivers the best opportunity to get the victory.
To my team, Ferrari, Charles Leclerc in fourth, Carlos Sainz in fifth. I think it's the best they could have really achieved during qualifying. I think the top three in front of them were just a league ahead of them. George Russell in sixth. And let's give our appreciation to the VCarb, or as I like to call them, the V carbohydrates team. Yuki Tsunoda in seventh and Daniel Ricciardo in ninth in qualifying. Coops, the first time I think the two RBs together qualified into Q3, I believe, this season. I know Yuki Tsunoda, consistent qualifier, consistent performer. Daniel Ricciardo, his levels have slowly started to creep up, especially after Miami. But how important is it for them to be knocking on the door of Q3 on regular occasions and for them to be in the top 10 shootout even more now?
Well, it's important. I mean, they are the Red Bull sister team. Not to say that they took anything from Red Bull, but they do have aspects of last year's car in that car. And when you've got Daniel Ricciardo behind one of the wheels, you should be expecting to be knocking on the door of Q3. I do have opinions about Daniel Ricciardo. I think we're past the peak of him. I think he's. I don't see where you can go when you're beaten by Yuki Tsunoda. No disrespect to Yuki Tsunoda, but he's an 8-time race winner. You know, he's a good driver, but if you're going to be put up against Yuki Tsunoda in a car that's decent and it's getting better and you still don't beat him, I don't know what his options are. But certainly the car's doing what it's supposed to do. It should be a top cushion in the top 10, but a really solid midfield car. And it didn't look like that at the start of the season, but it seems to be pushing away from the Stake, Haas, Williams kind of group at the back of the grid. They're kind of getting themselves away from there, which is where they should be, to be fair.
Hamilton in 8th, your man Hamilton, Ethan. Let's talk a bit about Hamilton. Obviously not had the greatest of times in recent weeks. But how disheartening do you think that obviously qualifying behind your teammate? I know obviously he finished in front of his teammate. Controversy alert. We'll talk about it a little bit later on. But how important do you think it is for Hamilton to kind of be pushing Russell and for Russell to be pushing Hamilton, especially in that fight for the P3 potentially in the Constructors' Championship?
Fight for P3. I think that would be a bit optimistic. If I'm being honest, I think P4 is the absolute limit of Mercedes even this season. I think that they're very evenly matched, particularly in qualifying. The two drivers, there's usually not more than a couple of tenths between them. Even last season, Hamilton had a much better season than Russell, but in qualifying, I think it was actually 11-0 across the season. So it goes to show they're both evenly matched in qualifying. So I know Russell's had the better of it this season, but it could easily switch the other way in the next 5 races. Hamilton can out-qualify Russell. I think Mercedes just need to solidify where they are at the minutes, get their understanding of the car, and then look to move forward. But they can't do anything until they actually understand the car and which direction to go in.
You're right. Maybe I got a little bit eager about Mercedes pushing for P3, but I don't think that's going to happen. I was trying to be nice, but you put yourself down to earth, and you put me down to earth. So, looking over the top 10 for the race, with Oscar Piastri's grid drop, it was Verstappen and Norris, P1 and P2, the 2 Ferraris of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz on the second row, with Piastri and Russell in 5th and 6th, Tsunoda 7th, Lewis Hamilton in 8th, Daniel Ricciardo in 9th, and Nico Hulkenberg in 10th. Let's jump into our average ratings, our 1 to 10 average ratings. Beginning with our race winner, Max Verstappen, qualified in 1st, finished in 1st. The thing is, I don't think it was a 10 out of 10 performance. I don't think it was. Obviously, he had those troubles in free practice. Even if the race was maybe continued for 1 or 2 laps, I think Lando Norris would have caught him. And I've given both Max Verstappen and Lando Norris the same grade just before anybody goes crazy, because I think both of them had a stellar weekend. So I've not gone with a 10. I've gone with a 9.5. Near perfect, but just missing that domination from Max Verstappen, which would have given him a 10 out of 10. Ethan, your rating?
No, I did go for a 10 out of 10 to be fair, because I thought that, from where that Red Bull was at the start of the weekend, to win the race still, I think is a good feat. I think that, obviously it wasn't the dominant performances like we've seen from Max Verstappen we got so used to seeing. But if you'd asked me at the start of the season, Max Verstappen's going to win a race by 7 tenths and you're going to give him a 10 out of 10. Well, I would have thought, well, unless he's actually started from last, then I don't see how that's possible. But maybe this does actually fill me with a bit of hope that moving forward we can see a bit more variety. because I don't think McLaren and Ferrari are too far behind. I think it's fine margins, and I think what we're seeing now is actually the Max Verstappen factor, which is elevating him above that, which won him the race. Let's be honest. So it's a 10 out of 10 for me.
Hoops, what did you make of Max Verstappen's race performance and race weekend overall at Imola?
I mean, it was a very Max Verstappen performance. He controlled it to the best of his ability. I wouldn't go as far as saying it's 10 out of 10. We've seen races that are dominant. You know, he comes out in every practice session, he's first or he's second, his Perez is second, and it just looks like nobody's getting near him. This weekend there were struggles. And, you know, I get what you've been saying, that you get from where he was in free practice one to where they were, you know, it's a big change from when he finished. But it wasn't faultless. There were points where you weren't sure, and you know, if Hülkenberg hadn't helped Verstappen out, Piastri probably would have got pole with the toe along the main straight to just give him that wee edge. So yeah, I think we're probably, for me, it'd probably be around an 8 out of 10. Maybe being a bit harsh, more because the bar that Red Bull and Verstappen set is high. It's really high, and that's a 10 out of 10. So anything that's not dominant, I couldn't give it as a 9. I couldn't give it. Maybe 8's a bit harsh. I'd probably say, okay, I'll go 9.
On to P2 man Lando Norris, obviously qualified in P3, but that was bumped up to P2, finished in P2, 7 tenths away from a race victory. Like I said, I've gone with the same rating for the pair of drivers out in P1 and P2. I've gone with a 9.5 for Lando Norris as well. I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think given if Lando Norris had 1 or 2 more laps more, I think he would have gotten Max Verstappen, and I think he would have gotten that race victory. But unfortunately, that wasn't to be, and he had to settle with a P2. But I mean, it's a third P2 in a row for Lando Norris. Well, third P2, third podium, should I say, in a row for Lando Norris, as he won in Miami last time out. But he's looking very good for his money. Those upgrades are looking tremendous on the McLaren, and he's looking very good. So I've settled with a 9.5 out of 10.
I've gone for a 9 out of 10. It would have been a 10 out of 10 if he clinched the victory. I don't know what I think Formula One need to do something about the dirty air cars are producing, because you look at it, some of the overtakes are so easy down the back straight. And then you got for the rest of the lap, they're almost sitting behind and waiting again for the start finish line, and they can't follow. So I think something needs to be done with the cars, maybe make them smaller and lighter, more nimble, and do something with the dirty air so you can get overtaking except the DRS zone, because that seems to be the only overtaking that happens, unless there's a big tire offset like we saw. I think Piastri sent it up the inside of Perez. I think it was into turn 6, if I'm not mistaken. But apart from that, there was I don't recall seeing another overtake that wasn't into that chicane. 9 out of 10 for Norris. Like I said, though, it would have been a 10 out of 10 if he just managed to clinch him. I think 1 or 2 more laps and he might have done that.
Oops.
Yeah, I'm going to go by 9 out of 10. I was almost pushing to be hypocritical and give it 10 out of 10 for him because I'm a McLaren fan, but I kind of had to get the neutral hat back on there and return to be Switzerland. And yeah, I think it's 9. It's the only team that I've seen in the grid so far since last year that when they get their upgrades, they correlate exactly to the wind tunnel and whatever they do behind the scenes to the track, and they do exactly what they need to do, and they do it right. And Norris, you know, going from earlier on, even this season, where it was the only way we're going to beat Max Verstappen if something breaks in his car or something happens to him, to we just needed a couple more laps, is showing that I would like to think that we're going to have some sort of battle. Maybe not for the championship, but we're going to have something. And I don't remember I don't remember Lando having any concerns or any issues throughout FP1, 2, 3 and into quali in the race. I think he kind of nailed on everything he needed to, and the only block for McLaren was that Piastri lost that spot up at the front. Because if you had the 2 McLarens, the strategy options they could have to get somebody in front of Max to pull him back, bring it back to Lando or the opposite way around. There was a lot of options, so it was a bit an opportunity missed there. But yeah, I think for Norris, he did exactly what he could do with what he had. It was just unfortunate we didn't have maybe 2 more laps, I think, to probably do some more.
On to P3 man, the final podium finisher in Charles Leclerc. I think he also had a very good weekend. I don't think it was to the level of Lando Norris and Max Verstappen, of course. I've settled with an. Oh, it's hard for me. Let's you know what? I'll go because I given the two out in front 9.5s. I'll go with one lower. I'll go with an 8.5 out of 10 for Charles Leclerc. I think he pushed slightly too hard, especially when he was trying to catch up Lando Norris, and I think he paid dividends in the end when he ultimately faded away from Lando Norris in that fight. But regardless, a good finish. In front of a adoring Ferrari fans in Italy. So yeah, I've settled with an 8.5 out of 10.
So I've gone for an 8 out of 10 for Charles Leclerc, slightly lower again. There was one point at which it looked as if he could get Norris and even get second place, but that wasn't to be. I think that the Ferrari was just not on it. They brought some upgrades, but it didn't close the gap as much as they would have liked, I'm sure. But a good effort, another podium, and he held off the fight from Piastri quite well. And then Piastri's tyre seemed to go a little bit, so he was quite comfortable there in third place. But all in all, a good weekend for Leclerc. And going into his home race, I'm sure he'll be hoping he can break that curse.
Oops.
Yeah, Leclerc, I would go probably about an 8. I don't remember too much about the weekend for him. Like you say, in the practice sessions that were up at the front, the upgrades have been a wee bit disappointing. But I think after the race, there was an article or everything F1 that we done where he's quoted as saying that third was the best they were going to get. So if the driver says that's the best that we're going to get, and he got it, then you can't really fault it. It's as much as we're going to get with the cars around him. So yeah, I'd go with a solid 8.
On to P4 man Oscar Piastri. Obviously qualified in second until he got bumped down to P5. Finished the race in fourth. I've gone with a similar grade to Charles Leclerc. I've gone with an 8.5 out of 10. Obviously, his qualifying performance was very, very good. Obviously got that penalty, which was self-inflicted, as he impeded Kevin Magnussen on his run. And then kind of was a lot better than Carlos Sainz, but just wasn't on the pace of any of the top three. I think very harsh on his tyres and just clearly couldn't get towards the top three. But yeah, I've settled with an 8.5 out of 10 for Oscar Piastri.
Yeah, I've gone slightly lower. I've gone for an 8 out of 10. It would have been, I'm sure it would have been a 9 if he didn't make that mistake in qualifying, impeding Magnussen. But he got that 3-place grid penalty and it was deserved. So I've got to knock off a point for that because it also put him behind the Ferraris. And I think, like I said, McLaren could have challenged or could have easily won that race if they had two cars competing against Verstappen rather than one. You can play a different strategy. They can manipulate it a little bit better to suit them a bit more. But wasn't to be for Oscar, but still a good performance, 8 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the same, to be honest. Probably an 8. Knocks a couple of marks off for the fact of the mistake, as Ethan had mentioned. So, yeah, not really much more to add, just to agree with that and go an 8 out of 10.
On to P5 man Carlos Sainz. Unfortunately, a very mediocre weekend. I've gone with yeah, you know what, I'll go with a 7. It was quite off the pace of Oscar Piastri. I don't think he was anywhere near the pace of Charles Leclerc. It looked good during the free practice sessions, but I think that's the best he could have got, really. Oscar Piastri had his number, got the move done, and kind of bolted away into the distance. So yeah, I've gone with a 7 for Carlos Sainz.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. 7 out of 10. I gave Leclerc an 8, so I've got to give Sainz a little bit lower. Not a bad performance by any means, but he was just slightly bested by his teammate throughout the entire weekend. He done well to hold up Piastri in that first stint because you could see the McLaren was quicker. But overall, not the performance Carlos Sainz would have wanted, and he'll be looking forward to the next race. I think he'll be glad that it's only a week away.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, to be honest. Probably go with a 7 out of 10 for Sainz. Probably the first time where Leclerc's really had the measure of him. He seems to have been kind of the lead Ferrari driver this year, just performance-wise. Whatever that may have been, couldn't get the Ferrari into the window, maybe just slightly off. Maybe Leclerc was just a wee bit better with balance or whatever that was. So yeah, not much more to say to that.
Let's group the two Mercedeses together. Lewis Hamilton in 6th and George Russell in 7th. I've gone with the same grade of 6.5 for the two of them. I think Hamilton, I don't know whether he was ever so slightly gifted due to Russell's late pit stop. I mean, Toto Wolff did come out that there was a bit of a threat with obviously the car behind, and Perez obviously being on a surge, which didn't really materialize. But I think that's the best the two of them could have really gotten, especially with Perez out of position. And I think the two Ferraris, the two McLarens and Verstappen were leagues above the two Mercedes drivers. So I've settled with a 6.5 for the two of them.
I've gone slightly higher. I've gone for a 7 for the pair of them. And I just want to say, this nothing point about Russell pitting for the fastest lap. Hamilton was on much pressure tyres. He was gaining at a considerable pace. And he was only 3 seconds behind when Russell pit. It was inevitable that Hamilton would at least catch up to the back of Russell. And I'm sure he would have overtaken him because, like I said, he was on much fresher tyres. He pitted late, a lot later than Russell. So I don't see what the massive fuss was about there. But yeah, decent performance, just about as much as Mercedes could have hoped for. And with Russell pitting, it gained an extra point for Mercedes. I think they know they're in for a tough season this year, and any point is going to help them. So Russell gaining the extra point for the team, so they end up with 1 extra point than they would have if they didn't pick. So they still would have got 6th and 7th. So a pair of 7s for both of them. Decent enough performances. Can't really say much more than that.
Yeah, I'm going down to 6, to be fair. I just expect more from them. Every weekend, I expect more from them. Whether it be the drivers, whether it be the car, and they always just disappoint me. It's just very mediocre. It's the one team that just cannot get a handle on the new rule set, and it's the one team that I expected to get a handle on the rule set. So yeah, they always disappoint me. I'm not a Mercedes fan, but they still disappoint me. I expect them to be fighting closer to the top and having more of getting the elbows out a bit more up the front. And they just don't do it. Half the time I forget they're even racing because they're just away doing their own thing.
Ethan, I know it's fair comments, right? It's fair.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything. I expect a lot more as well. Yeah, it is what it is, really, isn't it? That's their level at the minute.
I mean, I think you've got two fans that are very happy with their teams here, and one which is quite miserable.
Yes.
In the corner of my screen. And my co-host. I mean, when we go to Silverstone, I think you'll be expecting maybe a bit more, Ethan. I mean, what we saw from last year's race, bringing to this year's race. I mean, McLaren are up there, Red Bull, Ferrari. It's going to be hard for Mercedes to challenge anyone over top, but that's for future episodes. Let's get back to rating our drivers. On to Sergio Perez, qualified in P11, finished in P8. I've gone slap bang in the middle. I've gone for a 5 out of 10. Yeah, all in my notes, I usually jot a few notes down about the drivers. Awful qualifying, gained a few points. That's all I've got for Sergio Perez. I mean, he made the most of a bad situation, got into the points, and finished in 8th. So really making the most of a bad situation. And yeah, slap bang in the middle, average 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I've gone slightly lower. I've gone for a 4 out of 10. And I thought I was being quite nice. It's not a good performance from Checo at all. But like I said earlier on, I think qualifying really set the tone for his race. But I think he still should be beating those Mercedes. We've seen, like we said, Mercedes are nowhere at the minute. And if he had got that, you could maybe thought about giving him a 6 or a 7. But as it is, it's nowhere near good enough. It's not what Red Bull need. And, with McLaren and Ferrari closing up, Red Bull cannot afford for next season, if they are on an equal grounding, they can't afford to be having one driver competing because that will cost them the championship. We've seen a great deal of growth from McLaren this season. We've seen Ferrari continuing to make strides forward over the last season. So, Red Bull have a decision to make come the end of the season, whether they stick or twist. And at the minute, Perez had a good season so far, but this underlines his downfall. And this is what the problem is with Sergio Perez.
I can't agree anymore. I went 5 for him. Red Bull are in a very sticky situation. So he was never, I think he only got first and second last season twice in a car that dominant. He should have been second more or less every race. This year it was 3 out of 4, but then he didn't have a good Miami. He certainly didn't have a good Imola. And he didn't capitalise on Verstappen failing, retiring in Australia. So this weekend reminded me of Sergio Perez last year, when he would make stupid mistakes. He would end up in 11th, 12th, 13th, whatever that was. The biggest problem for Red Bull, though, who did he go for? Because Carlos probably doesn't want to go there. He was there in 2015 and him and Verstappen didn't get on. And that he's the only real free agent that's left that would warrant a seat in Red Bull next to Verstappen. So what do you do as Christian Horner? I don't know. But if we're talking solely on this weekend, it was a very poor performance. Like I say, flashes of last year's Perez. We thought we'd kind of go over that, and clearly we haven't. And I haven't seen anything when I've been, researching and reading up about how the race, the fallout. I haven't seen anything where there was anything notable, like a problem with the car or balance issues. It was just a Perez weekend. He kind of needs to do better.
On to Lance Stroll. Finally back into the points. I mean, here on the grid, we slate Lance Stroll a lot. But finally with Fernando Alonso outside of the points, Lance Stroll is able to capitalise and get himself some valuable points. Qualified in P13, finished in P9. I've gone with a 6 out of 10. I think it's valuable for Aston Martin to keep on plugging away and keep on getting some points here and there, even when Fernando Alonso is not there in the points. And Lance Stroll finally stepped up loosely in quotation marks to finish inside the points. So I've gone with one better than Sergio Perez because the expectation on Perez is enormous. So it warrants a 5 out of 10. And I think that our usual expectation of Lance Stroll is a lot lower than Perez's. So I've settled with a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I've gone for exactly the same. It's better, but it's not quite enough. I know, obviously, you look at the cars he's been beaten by, and you think, who of them is he going to beat? But he qualified poorly for starters. I think he was 13th in a car that should be really getting into the top 10. You can't tell me, maybe you can make an argument that the RBs are quicker, but you can't tell me that Haas is quicker than the Aston Martin. And then he's made up a few positions, but again, he needs to be higher up. Like, I know Alonso's had an absolute stinker, we'll get onto him, but look where Alonso has placed that car this season. He's got a number of good point scoring positions, and this is Lance Stroll's second point scoring finish this season. So let's be realistic there. So 6 out of 10. It's a decent job. It's a return to the points, and it's what he needed, but let's not overly praise it.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a 6 out of 10 as well. I think there's, the Astons are pretty much level with the Mercedes at the minute, in that kind of middle of the pack battle. And look, I don't think there's an argument about Stroll as a teammate to Alonso. They were the biggest deficit to each other, I think, from Alonso to Stroll in amount of points from last season from every team. And you don't win anything in that situation in Formula One when you've got that big a deficit. So yeah, 6 out of 10. And, as Ethan says, you should be up there at the top 10 in that car every weekend. And it's only when Stroll decides to leave his wallet in the paddock and not put it in his driving race that he actually gets anywhere, So yeah, disappointing, but it's points for them. What can you say?
On to Yuki Tsunoda, who was the final points finisher. Qualified in P7, finished the race in P10. Obviously, was overtaken by Lance Stroll, Sergio Perez, and Lewis Hamilton, which demoted him down to 10th. But it's another good points finish. I've gone with a 7 for Yuki. I think there's a level of expectation now that's grown on Yuki Tsunoda, as I think he's trying to get a seat further up in the F1 paddock. But he's going to be finishing in the points, and he's delivered that once again, finished inside the points. It's a good points finish, and he's climbed himself into the top 10 of a championship. So it's another great performance from Yuki Tsunoda. And another top 10 finish. So I've gone with a 7 out of 10.
I've gone slightly higher. I've gone for an 8. I thought it's a good performance, good point scoring finish for Yuki. I think that he was in a good battle there with Nico Hülkenberg and Daniel Ricciardo, and he's ended up beating both of those. And he continues to beat his much more experienced teammate in Daniel Ricciardo. I think pitting early to gain track position helped him because it got him into the points, but it ultimately was his undoing because it meant Stroll in a quicker car on fresher tyres had basically an easy overtake on him. So a good performance from Yuki. He's doing his reputation no harm with performances like these.
Yeah, I'm gonna go for an 8 out of 10. Yuki's impressed me a lot this season. As Ethan's has touched on there, he's outperforming Ricciardo. He's done it again. Got himself in the points. I think 10th is where that RB, V car, whatever you want to call it, car is positioned on the grid. And I think he's just stepped up. He's just saw the opportunity to do it. He's got a car that obviously works for him. He understands it a bit better. And he's given the Red Bull, upper management a difficult question now, because at the start of the season, you were thinking Ricciardo on the bubble, Yuki's probably out, Liam Lawson will get one of the seats, and then it's just figuring out who else is getting the next seat. But now you're like, Yuki and Liam Lawson, is Ricciardo the issue? So that he's doing all he can. And yeah, it was a good solid performance for him. Like I say, the cars around him were a wee bit faster from when he qualified, and he got himself solidly in the points. But yeah, thoroughly impressed by him.
On to the two Hasses in Nico Hulkenberg and Kevin Magnussen. Hulkenberg in 11th and Magnussen in 12th. I'm going to pair them together. I've gone with a pair of sevens. I mean, I probably should go a little bit high with Kevin Magnussen after an amazing start, making up obviously 6 places from his qualifying position to finish 12th. But I think it's another good race for the two Haas drivers, knocking on the points. Unfortunately, unable to get inside the points, but they're constantly showing signs of improvement. I mean, Nico Hulkenberg at one point was top of the pile in qualifying in Q1 until Verstappen and Leclerc demoted him down to P3. So his Mr. Saturday reputation still is very high. And on the Sunday, he just wasn't able to convert it into points. And Kevin Magnussen, virtually coming from the back of the field to finish just outside the points, is another tremendous drive from a usually angry Danish driver. I think he kept it calm and composed this race and did some very good racing, very good clean racing. So I've gone with the pair of sevens for the two Haas drivers.
Yeah, completely agree. I think finishing 11th and 12th, they'll be a bit disappointed that they couldn't get any points, the Haas drivers, but it goes to show where they are. Where we thought they were going to be at the start of the season, we thought they were going to be the slowest team by a country mile. And now where they are, they're finishing 11th and 12th, and we're thinking, that's a bit unlucky that they haven't got any points. It's been a great turnaround from them. Nico Hulkenberg continues to shine, and I think Kevin Magnussen put in a good performance as well. These two drivers are putting in some good performances, and I think they are comfortably the 7th quickest team. They are behind the RBs. I know Hulkenberg was doing his most to challenge Tsunoda, but I think at the end of the day, he was just slightly too quick for him. And then, with how competitive, how difficult it is to beat those top 5, and then you throw RB into the mix as well, to even finish 11th, 12th is good going from the two Haas drivers. And yeah, like I said, I can't really split them. So 7 for each.
Yeah, I can't really add to that. I would go with sevens for both of them. Who would have thought that Haas would get better without Gunter Steiner? Pretty solid. I don't think they could have done much better. Maybe a shenanigans if somebody dropped out, then maybe they sneaked into 10th place and got a point. But the way that everything shaped out, I think that 11th to 12th was pretty much where they were going to be. But yeah, pretty solid weekend for them.
On to Daniel Ricciardo, qualified up in 9th, finished the race in P13. In my notes, I've got really good qualifying, but race was just meh. It just faded away. Yuki Tsunoda was obviously the quicker of the two RBs this weekend. I've still gone with a 6. I still think it's a decent weekend for Daniel Ricciardo. It's nowhere near his teammate. But it's showing signs of slow and steady improvement. Slow and steady improvement is probably not what he needs at this stage of his career. I think he really needs to hit those points finishes on a more frequent basis. But if this is the start of something good for Daniel Ricciardo, I don't think he'll complain too much. So I've gone with a 6.
Yeah, I agree. He's dropped 4 positions in the race. He qualified up in 9th, which is good effort for him. He was on Tsunoda's pace, which I think has been one of his biggest downfalls this season so far, is qualifying. And then you look at the 4 cars that's overtaken him. Well, you've got Perez and Lance Stroll there, and they're in much quicker cars, so they should be beating him. And then the 2 Haas drivers, and you think maybe he could be beating at least one of them, especially Magnussen coming down from 18th. But it's a better performance from Ricardo. He's had a couple of good performances in the last 2. And then, this is a little bit disappointing to be outside the points, but he's not a million miles away. I think it's more Tsunoda's doing a very, very good job rather than Ricardo's doing a poor job. I think he's doing an okay job, especially these last few races. So 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm going to go down the 5 out of 10, to be honest. I'm disappointed with Ricardo, partly because I was really excited when he signed for McLaren and it just didn't work. I was like, Lando and Ricardo would be brilliant, so maybe I'm holding a grudge against him for that. But this weekend, we shouldn't be discussing Ricardo is getting beaten by Yuki by a few tenths, or he's a wee bit closer, or this shouldn't even be a conversation. It should literally be the occasional weekend where it doesn't click. A bit like Alonso this weekend, it didn't click for him. Nobody's thinking that Stroll's a better driver. It's just one of these weekends where Stroll, it worked, and that should be the Ricardo-Yuki situation. Yuki shouldn't be close to him on paper. And maybe a weekend where it just doesn't quite work, or, Ricardo gets tripped up by somebody, or something happens and Yuki gets the better of him. That's what it should be with those two. And it just isn't. So maybe I'm being a bit too harsh. Maybe it's heart over head and I'm not looking at it objectively, but, I think there shouldn't be a conversation, I think. The talent that Ricardo should be closer to the top 10 and should always be in front of Yuki. So 5 out of 10 for me.
On to Esteban Ocon, qualified up in P12 and finished the race in P14. I've gone with another 6 out of 10. I think Alpine are showing signs of improvement, especially with Esteban Ocon. I think Pierre Gasly is definitely not on the pace of Esteban Ocon. And I don't know whether that would be surprising because I think for many of Formula One fans, you hear the name Pierre Gasly, you think a very, very good driver that's been a consistent points finisher, and obviously he's won a Formula One race in Monza in an AlphaTauri car, and I think Pierre Gasly will probably be on the phone and he's probably going to be wanting out from Alpine at the end of this season, especially with the performances that he's been enduring in that car. But Esteban Ocon, I think he's the shining light for Alpine. Off the back of a first points finish for a team last weekend. Obviously wasn't able to secure anything this time around, but slowly but surely I think Alpine are crawling up that order, and I think it'll be just maybe a matter of time and a matter of a few upgrades when they'll finally be challenging for regular points. So I've gone with a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I agree. I've gone for a 6 out of 10 as well. It's a good performance from Esteban Ocon. He's done a decent job, but he continues to beat his teammate comfortably in all aspects. Out-qualified him again. I think that's 7-0 in qualifying, if I'm not mistaken. And then he's beaten him in the race as well, only by a couple of positions. But out of the driver pairings, you got to say Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly is probably one of the closest. And I don't think there's much in terms of skill, but Esteban Ocon is having a much, much better season than Pierre Gasly. And you talk about Gasly might want him out of that team. Esteban Ocon, he's still got those links to Mercedes. Mercedes need a driver. Is Verstappen going to happen? Who knows? But if not, they've got a driver there who's still managed by Toto Wolff. So there's a possibility he could end up at that team next season. And it wouldn't be so far-fetched to say that. Toto Wolff likes him a lot, and he's a very, very good driver, and he's continuing to put in some decent performances this season.
Yeah, I'll go with a 6 out of 10 for him. Pretty decent weekend. My issue with Alpine is I think Ocon and Gasly are too similar a driver. You need a wee bit of black v white. In terms of driver lineup. I don't Russell and Hamilton are slightly different drivers in the way they work. The same for the Leclerc and Sainz, especially Verstappen and Perez. They're going in the right direction. They flatter to deceive, and hopefully as a works team they'll get their ship together and figure out how to actually run a Formula One team where they don't stand with their hand behind their back for 2/3 at the start of the season, or first few races. So it was probably the best to expect from Alpine. They're going in the right way. Whether it's quick enough for everybody, probably not. But they're starting to get something together.
On to the next few gaggle of cars. I've gone with the same rating, so I'm just gonna dish them out. So Zhou Guanyu, Pierre Gasly, Logan Sargent, Valtteri Bottas. From P15, P16, P17, and P18. I've gone with the same rating of 5 out of 10s. I think they all had average weekends. They obviously didn't set the world alight. And yeah, I think all four of them drivers kind of expect to be kind of near there. Maybe Pierre Gasly was expecting a little bit more after his Q1 performance. Logan Sargent obviously qualified in 20th, so I think he was probably not expecting to finish in P17, but when your teammate retires from a race, it's obviously going to bump you up one place. But for those four gaggle of cars, I've gone for a 5 out of 10.
Well, I wasn't expecting you to go four drivers in a row. I'll try and break this down. So Guan Yu Zhou, I've gone for a 5 out of 10. You know, his qualifying is really, really letting him down because, you know, in race pace, I think he's been quicker than Bottas this season. But his qualifying is just been horrendous all season long. He's not got out Q1 yet. I think him and Sargent are the only drivers that haven't. Then Pierre Gasly, I gave us Esteban Ocon a 6. I've given him one lower because I think that Esteban Ocon edged him in every session. So I think that's fair. Logan Sargent, I've gone for a 4 out of 10. It's an all right performance, but it's nothing special. It's not. Logan Sargent, I think he's in over his head a little bit here. And it's difficult to see because, you know, I think there is a driver in there somewhere. He's just not able to show it on any sort of consistent basis or at all, really. Maybe the pressure is getting to him a little bit and he's not. And when he is having some okay weekend, he is crashing out like what happened in Miami. And then Valtteri Bottas, sorry, I've gone for a 3 out of 10. You know, he might be beating his teammate in every qualifying session, but his race pace is completely off pace. He's finished last of the runners, essentially. And it's just absolutely nowhere from Valtteri Bottas.
Yeah, I think I'm just going to stick with the 5 out of 10 for all of them. It was one of those races where you kind of forget they were there. If you didn't have the tracker down the left-hand side, you wouldn't realise they were still on the track. When it comes to Logan Sargent, I don't think he's a Formula One driver. I think maybe stick him in an IndyCar, see what he does in Indy. Maybe stock cars, Le Mans, World Endurance. He's a motorsport driver. I think there is, as Ethan says, there's something there, but it's not Formula One. Interestingly enough, speaking of those drivers, there was a report or a rumour out today that Bottas is linked with the Williams seat and not Antonelli for Logan's seat. So that's an interesting one to keep an eye on. I think Bottas should call it. I think he's doing a Kimi Räikkönen now and just phoning it in. When you've got Ollie Behrman, Liam Lawson and a couple of other kind of Antonelli, at least all really talented young drivers can't get a seat. And then you've got Bottas and you've got Logan Sargent on the grid. Kind of makes a mockery of the system, to be fair. So yeah, 5 out of 10 for them. Didn't really do anything of note, but they didn't do anything disastrous. So go with that.
I'm glad that someone else agrees with me that Valtteri Bottas is doing it as a hobby like Kimi Räikkönen did all those years ago. On to Fernando Alonso, who, in my notes, I've got horror show. Completely uncharacteristic to Fernando Alonso. Obviously, that crash in FP3 didn't help him. Qualified in P19, finished in P19, and yeah, I've gone with a 3 out of 10. It's obviously not the weekend Fernando Alonso would have hoped for, and here's to hoping that Fernando Alonso bounces back next weekend and this weekend coming in Monaco.
Yeah, like I said, I've gone for a 1 out of 10 for Fernando Alonso. It was atrocious from start to finish, but I think it's definitely an anomaly. He's not. This isn't reflective of Fernando Alonso. He's put in some very good performances this season, and he's been thereabouts every single race. And this is just a one-off where he had that crash in FP3, then went over the gravel, trying to push, get every 10th out of the car. And I think that really damaged his floor because then he started from the pit lane and then he just couldn't make up any positions. He never looked like getting anywhere near the point. So I think he just went on the softs for a bit of fun at the end, put some decent laps. And he still couldn't get a fastest lap off of George Russell, who was on the mediums. So a poor weekend from Fernando Alonso, but it's nothing concerning at this stage.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a 2 out of 10, to be honest. As Ethan says, it was a horror show. I haven't seen anything to say there was any issues with the car that caused the problems, or whether it was just one of those weekends. Again, like a couple of other teams just couldn't quite get the setup right, and you kind of lost it a wee bit. You know, when you qualify 19th, start the pit lane, they finish 19th, it's a poor weekend. And it's even worse when it's somebody like Alonso. So I'm sure he's had a few races over the years that haven't quite worked, or he's not been on the pace at all over the weekend. It's not going to affect him. He's going to come back next week, this week coming, and fling that car in 11th or something. Or watch me, I've said that now, and he'll do well, and he won't. He'll be out again. But it's. I think it's just an anomaly. It's just one of these things for Alonso, to be honest.
On to our one and only retiree from the Imola Grand Prix, Alex Albon, qualified in 14th and retired from the race on lap 51 or 52, I believe it was. I've gone with a 4 out of 10. I think he was quite unlucky during that race. Yeah, that's about all I can say. Unfortunate retirement. And yeah, a 4 out of 10 from me.
Yeah, I've gone for the same. He was unfortunate with the wheel, obviously not being secured properly. That's nothing to do with him at all. And then from that point in, he's a lap behind. He got a penalty for it as well, because of the unsafe release, and they apparently should have stopped on track, because it was unsafe to continue in case that wheel fell off, which is fair enough. And then I think the only reason he was running was in case there was a safety car, but when it was very clear that there wasn't going to be a safety car, and if there was, he was too far behind to actually do anything, then they retired the car. So unfortunate for Albon because he qualified well. He was up in 14th. Maybe there was a possibility that he could have got points, but I find it unlikely. It's a 4 out of 10. Not much more to add.
Yeah, I'll go with a 3 out of 10 for Albon. It was just one of those weekends for him. Qualified reasonably well, and then whatever happened at the wheel. Interestingly enough, I didn't really notice at the time, and even in the replays, that there was something obvious with the wheel. I think even the commentators on Sky, when they done the replays, you couldn't quite see what it was. And generally speaking, in the history of times I've watched Formula One, if there's a problem with the wheel, it's either just about to fall off or it's bouncing down the track. So yeah, just one of those races for Williams. It's a bit of a shame for them. Albon's not really performed very well compared to last season, but I think that's more to do with the car than Williams, than Albon, than anything else. Just a tough one at the office for Albon and Williams, really.
Now on to our little junior Formula section in Formula 2 and the Formula 3. So let's round up what happened in those two categories. In Formula 3, it was Kacper Stuka who was on pole position for the sprint race, but unfortunately he wasn't able to deliver convert that pole position into a race victory. It was actually Oliver Goethe that got the race victory for Campos. He did get a penalty, but he got that penalty reversed. So he did secure the 11 points with the fastest lap. It was Tim Tramnitz for MP that finished in P2 with Noel Leon in P3. Dino Beganovic was the lead Prema in P4 with Stuka in 5th, Miney in 6th, Lawrence Van Hoopen in 7th, Arvin Limbad in 8th, Nikita Bedrin in 9th, and Santiago Ramos came from P12 to finish in 10th place. In the sprint race later on, it was Omari Cordial that was on reverse grid pole, but it was actually Franco Colapinto that did get the race victory ahead of Paul Aron. Championship leader Zane Maloney finished on the podium in 3rd. Cordial finished in 4th. Behrman in 5th. Gabriel Bortoletto, who got pole position on the Friday, finished in 6th. Tyler Bernard was in 7th, and Richard Shaw was in 8th. Obviously, there was a bit of a lap one crash between Stanek, Hajar, Dirksen, Fittipaldi, and Hauger, which saw all of those all those 5 drivers eliminated on lap 1. And then moving on to the feature race before, we have a bit of a review of what happened in Formula 2 and Formula 3 with the standings. It was Santiago Ramos that was on pole position, but it was actually his teammate Sami Moga-Tunith, the driver from Trident, Ramos's Trident teammate, who finished in P1 to claim his first F3 victory. Oliver Goethe won and got himself another podium as he finished second. Leonardo Fornaroli finished in third, with championship leader Luke Browning finishing in fourth, which dropped him down into second in the championship. Dino Boganovic, another good points finish for him, as he finished in fifth. Gabriel Maini was the second of the Prema drivers, who finished in sixth. Arvid Lindblad finished in seventh as the third of the Prema drivers. Santiago Ramos dropped to P8 from P1 to finish in eighth place. And then it was Mari Boyer and Sebastian Montoya who made their way from virtually near the back of the grid to finish in P9 and P10, with Moya gaining 18 places and Montoya gaining 13. In the F2 feature race, it was Bortoleto on pole position, with Behrman and Hajar in second and third, and it was Hajar that finished the race in P1, with Gabriel Bortoleto dropping down to second place. Joshua Dirksen made it to the podium as he claimed his AIX's first podium and his first podium of the season, as he finished P3 from P5. Kimi Antonelli, who we've spoken about in this episode, finished a very valiant P4, back-to-back fourth place finishes for him in feature races. Franco Colapinto gained more points on the board as he came from P9 to finish P5 in the race, and he's up to seventh place in the standings. Paul Aaron closed the gap to 5 points to Zane Maloney, as he finished in P6. Jack Crawford and Juan Manuel Correa for the Dams team. Crawford, the American driver, making up 14 places, with Juan Manuel Correa gaining 12 places to gain his first points finish in P8. Victor Martins came from P22 to P9, gaining 13 places. Got himself 2 points plus the extra one for the fastest lap. And Richard Shaw rounded off the points finishes in P10, coming up from P15. That's a lot there. That is a lot. But now let's actually engage Ethan into the conversation. Ethan, I've got a bit of dry mouth. What did you make of the limited running, or the small amounts of F2 and F3 action? What did you make of it? Especially Kimi Antonelli. He's gained 3 places in the F2 championship. He's still approximately, I say he's 32 points behind Zane Maloney in the F2 championship, but for his rookie campaign, it's looking okay so far.
Yeah, we said after in our preview that he needed a good weekend. You know, obviously he'd had a couple of disappointing weekends after all of the hype that was put around him, but he's had a good weekend here, some solid performances, and then some good results as well. Ollie Behrman as well had a good sprint race and couldn't quite replicate that in the feature race. But yeah, you know, they're probably the two from Formula 2 that you look at and say they have a very, very good chance of being in Formula 1 next season. But for Kimi Antonelli, if he's not ready at the end of this season, then there's always next season. You know, obviously he wants to be in the sport as soon as possible because F1 is the pinnacle. But if it turns out he's not quite ready at this moment in time, then he's only a rookie. He's in his first season in Formula 2. There might not be as much negative around leaving him in the sport for another year, giving him an extra year to mature and hone his skills, and then he can come into Formula 1 and possibly even Mercedes from 2026.
Let's look at the Formula 3 standings as we head into the Monaco Grand Prix. So it is Leonardo Fornaroli who's gained the lead from Luke Browning. He's on 52 points. Luke Browning drops down to P2. He's on 49 points, still gaining a valuable amount of points in 12. Dino Boganovic, the lead of the Prema drivers, in P3, gaining 17 points. He's on 45, with Gabriel Maini, his teammate, also on 45 points. Oliver Goethe probably gained the most points out of everyone. He gained 30 points from this weekend. He's made up 6 places from when he started the Imola weekend to come into the top 5. Sami Megatunith, the French driver, he gained 25 points after he won the feature race. He's gained 4 places, and he's on 38 points. The third of the Prema drivers, Arvid Lindblad, in his rookie season, he's in 7th, losing 2 places. He's on 32 points. Tim Tramnitz in 8th. He's lost 2 places. He's on 30 points. And rounding off the top 10 is Lawrence Van Hoopen and Christian Mansell. Definitely not related to Nigel Mansell in any sense, but he's in 10th on 20 points. Ethan, there's obviously a grid of 30 cars in the F3 grid. And it's so tight in the top 10. There's only 3 points separating first and second, and then even if you look down from first to 10th, there's only 32 points separating them. There, that's virtually just a feature race victory and a sprint race victory. We're obviously going to be most familiar with obviously the likes of Arvid Lindblad, obviously being a Brit, Dino Beganovic, Prema driver, Gabriel Mani, also in his second season, Prema driver. How crucial is it for obviously any of those top 10 to gain himself a F3 victory by the end of the season and being obviously in the driver market to progress into F2 and in the long run progress into Formula One?
Well, that's the ultimate goal for a lot of these drivers. They want to get their seat in F2 and then progress up to F3. That's the natural progression. I think for a lot of these drivers, it won't work out, of course, but that's what, unfortunately, motorsport is a cruel world, and only the elite make it through. I got to say, I was really impressed with Oliver Goethe this weekend, particularly that sprint race. I'm not sure whether who saw it, but with that VSC towards the end of the race, and then such a smart move, getting the jump into Ravazza and then securing the win. So it was a very genius bit of driving, and he really earned that with a bit of ingenuity there. So a great effort, but like I said, it's all about putting yourself in the spotlight, and I don't think he's done himself any disservice there.
Obviously, Oliver Goethe, as I said, gained the most points out of that race weekend with 30 and gaining 6 places in the championship. On to F2, Zane Maloney still leads the way. He gained 6 points to up his tally to 68. Paul Aaron is breathing down his neck. He's on 63 points. Isaac Hadjar, Red Bull Academy driver, 25 points after that feature race win. He's put himself only 9 points away from the championship leader and only 4 points away from Paul Aaron in third. Dennis Hauger, now in his third season. I know everybody was raving about him when he won the F3 championship, but now I think I don't want to say he's slightly faded away, but I don't think he's been quite in the spotlight. He's in 4th place after gaining no points from this weekend. Unlucky, obviously, in the sprint race as he crashed out. Gabriel Bortoleto, obviously McLaren tyres. I'm not McLaren tyres, but Brazilian driver. Obviously, I've got that pole position, and obviously in a race weekend where people were celebrating Ayrton Senna. I think he did very, very good for his country there. He gained 23 points to gain 7 places in the standings. He's on 38 points. Kimi Antonelli, 12 points added onto his tally, 36 points now overall, gaining 3 places. Franco Colapinto did a very, very good job gaining 21 points. He's on 34 points. Kush Miney, similarly to him, is on 34 points after gaining no points from the weekend. Enzo Fernandez, Enzo. Why did I say Enzo Fernandez? Enzo Fittipaldi, the brother of there's a long host of Fittipaldi. The bloodline there, Enzo Fittipaldi gaining no points from that weekend. He's on 32, and Jack Crawford gained 6 points to finish to round out the top 10, and he's also on 32 points. So another category where it's very tight from first down to 10th. Obviously in Formula One, you're not most of the time it's not as tight, but the machinery here is very much equal. It all depends on setup. And Zane Maloney leads the way. Paul Aaron and Isaac Hadjar breathing down the neck, but it can swing in loads of different directions from now between the end of the season.
Absolutely, like you said, it is a spec series, so you've got every weekend is a new chance, a new opportunity, and I think that's the beauty of it. You get such variation in the results, unlike Formula One at times where we seem to have the same winner a lot of the time. So you get the drivers do have their opportunity to really stand out and put their name in the spotlight. So I would expect to see a lot more changes before the end of the season, and I don't think we're far. I don't think we're nearly over in terms of drama from this season. We'll just have to see how it goes.
On to our final segment from a very long episode. I definitely might need a lie down after this episode, but it's certainly been an enjoyable one. Our Monaco Grand Prix predictions, a little preview. I'll kickstart off with our little 2-star predictions. I've gone with Red Bull, Ferrari, McLaren podium. I think each of those constructors will be represented on the podium. And I've gone with Esteban Ocon points. Last season, we obviously saw a very good performance from Esteban Ocon. This season, the Alpine has not been anywhere near that sort of level. But I think if we have the sort of drama that we did last season in a race around Monaco, I think Esteban Ocon has got very good chance of getting some points for Alpine.
I think that's a good one. That's a good prediction there. For my star predictions, I've gone for pole position will win the race. I know it's a bit of a boring option considering it's Monaco, but I've got to bag the points, get the easy ones in. And I've also gone for a double McLaren podium.
Well, to be fair, for the star predictions are pretty much spot on to what you've just said, Ethan, and I actually wrote them down here before we started. In terms of the podium and qualifying, I had Lando, Verstappen, Piastri top 3 for quali. Lando, Piastri, Verstappen for the race win or the race podium. My star prediction was that Aston will continue to struggle and Ricciardo would outperform Yuki Tsunoda. But in terms of Ethan, you saying McLaren getting a double podium, I've got that, and also the person who qualified first would win the race, which I had Lando down for both. So we're kind of on the same wavelength when it comes to those predictions.
On to our quali and race predictions. So I'll rack off both of them. So for qualifying, I've gone with a Max Verstappen pole position. I know, boring, boo me. And I've gone actually with a Charles Leclerc P2. I think he's obviously got that Monaco curse around him, and I'm hoping that he breaks it. Maybe gets another pole position and then crashes into the barrier again. I don't know what will happen this time around. But I've gone with those two as the top two. I've gone the two McLarens of Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri in 3rd and 4th, and Carlos Sainz in 5th. And then for the race, I've gone with another Max Verstappen victory. Lando Norris to overtake Charles Leclerc, maybe in the pit lane or something, to finish in 2nd. Charles Leclerc rounding off the podium in 3rd. And I've actually gone with Carlos Sainz doing a number on Oscar Piastri this weekend and finishing 4th with Oscar Piastri in 5th. Ethan, your quali in race predictions.
So I've gone for Norris to get pole position. He was so close last weekend. I think he will get it this weekend. I've gone for Verstappen to get 2nd place, and then Charles Leclerc 3rd, and then I've gone for Piastri and Sainz 4th and 5th, which means that I've also gone for Lando Norris to win again. He easily could have won his 2nd race on spin, and it could have been 3 on spin. If my prediction is right, but I think he's been so close. I think currently on form, he is the 2nd best driver on the grid, and only Verstappen is ahead of him. And then you've got to say who's having a better season to this point in terms of their overall performance. And I don't think there's very much in it. Norris has obviously been outstanding this season, has really shown his class in his last couple of races. Verstappen I've gone for in 2nd and Piastri 3rd to claim that double McLaren podium. And then I've gone for Leclerc and Sainz missing out on the podium in 4th and 5th.
Hoops, finally, your qualifying and race top 5.
Yeah, I kind of jumped together a wee bit and said it earlier, but just to kind of confirm it for you guys, qualifying for me would be Lando, Verstappen, Piastri, Leclerc and Sainz. Like Ethan's kind of touched on there, I think Lando's on the bubble there. I think he's probably going to do it for that. For the race, I've got a 1-2 for McLaren and Lando Piastri, and then I've got Verstappen, Carlos Sainz, and Sergio Perez. I think the supposed Monaco curse for Leclerc will strike again, and he will get in the top 5.
That's not a good thing for me to hear. I'll agree with, I'll say that. But hopefully the curse does not strike Charles Leclerc, and hopefully he stays trouble-free this time around. Thank you, Ethan, for joining me on this episode. Thank you, Coops, for joining me as well. Coops, take it away. Where can we find you? Where can we find all your stuff, etc., etc.?
Well, my name, I'm Coops or Jamie. When we first started Everything F1, there was 3 of us, and we were 2 Jameses and a Jamie, so I had to go with Coops. We are on all of our socials, Everything F1. It's join EF1, unless you're on TikTok and it's EF1 official. If you want to talk to me directly, I am Coops-EF1 on Twitter. We are on Spotify, all our usual podcast streaming sites. And we tend to do a couple of podcasts a week. You can find us on everythingf1.com. We do a lot of writing and articles. We do F1. We're accredited to F2, F3, IndyCar and Formula E, so we do a lot of stuff for that. We've got a few guys that do the feeder series and, of course, Formula One. So we're usually around the socials at somewhere on those addresses if you want to grab us there.
Lovely. That's us done and dusted for this Imola review and Monaco preview. Like I said, we'll be back next week reviewing the Monaco Grand Prix. I need to lie down. See you next week when we will be reviewing the Monaco Grand Prix. Goodbye.